Joining us now from London is the host of the Spectator Australia's Fire at Will podcast, Will Kingston. Will, thank you for joining us. I know you're in London, but you're an Aussie, so I have to get your thoughts on this. As we know, MAGA mania has taken the world by storm. I've been out in Sydney and I'm seeing the MAGA caps out and I love it. But there's a pub owner in Melbourne that is still living in a different reality. He's kicked out a Trump supporter for wearing a MAGA hat, claiming that he's enticing political violence. I mean, what is going on? Does he not realise who the American people elected as president? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's peak Melbourne, isn't it? Look, I think this is a mask-off moment. Just think about over the last 5-10 years, if you're a conservative, even if you're in the middle, how often you have to tolerate symbols from the left as you walk down the street, whether it be pride flags, whether it be someone wearing a keffiyeh, whether it be any number of loud and proud posters, symbols, items of clothing. And you don't kick up a fuss and you just let it wash over you. It's become part of day-to-day life. And you know what? The vast majority of people on the right don't care. Good on you, live your life. The interesting thing is, for so many people on the left, violence has become an acceptable way to protest against someone like a Trump supporter. No longer do we solve these sorts of things by being an adult and ignoring it, or having a friendly debate or conversation. We now go, oh, this may be something that will promote violence, because the left so often now are the ones that respond to differing political views with violence because they see it as a means to an end, because they're the morally righteous ones. So look, I know this is an isolated incident, but it is a little window into the leftist mentality.
Absolutely. And the era of shaming Trump supporters is well and truly over. As you say, it's the side that's on the left that claims to be the side of inclusivity. But of course, there are exceptions, and that is anyone that is daring to be on the right. Now, you are in London, so we've got to talk about what's going on between Trump and the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. He has spoken to Keir Starmer 6 days after returning to the White House. And Trump said that Keir Starmer is doing a good job. He said, I may not agree with his philosophy, but I have a very good relationship with him. Let's just look back at some of the remarks that Keir Starmer has made about Donald Trump in the past.
I wouldn't want Donald Trump round for dinner. But don't underestimate the danger to the world if Trump is re-elected this time around. I'm anti-Trump. I would like to send my warmest congratulations to President Trump on his inauguration as the 47th President of the United States.
Oh, it is so uncomfortable to watch him say he'd like to send his warmest congratulations to Trump.
Yeah, the robot malfunctioned, didn't he? Like, he's awkward and uncomfortable to watch at the best of times, but particularly in that instance, I actually don't think that will be the issue. You know, if Trump held a grudge against everyone who says nasty things about him in the past, he wouldn't be able to do a deal with almost anyone. But I think the bigger issue is that Trump just won't respect this bloke, because the one thing we know about Trump is that he responds to strength, and he would see Starmer as being weak. And the fact of the matter is, Starmer is weak. In fact, he is the antithesis of everything that Trump is. He believes in this, rules-based international order at the expense of putting his own country first. He believes soft on borders. He's soft on illegal immigrants. He buys into the net zero hoax at the expense of his own economy. These are all things that Trump would look at and go, you know what? This guy isn't a real leader. I don't respect him. But I will say, Gabriella, one more thing. In addition to having a hopeless leader, this hopeless leader doesn't actually have a particularly good product to sell Trump at the moment. The UK economy is in the toilet. The growth numbers are non-existent. And Trump would be looking at the UK and going, there's actually a lot of other parts of the world that I can do business with. I actually don't see a real need to engage on this sort of level. And they're certainly not the same military partner as they were in times gone by. So rubbish leader with a poor product to sell, it spells a pretty dangerous time for the United Kingdom with their relationship with the US.
It does. And if you look at the polls, people are just so unhappy with Keir Starmer. It seemed that Nigel Farage's Reform UK party really had the momentum behind it. Is that still the case?
Yeah, it is. So look, the unfortunate thing is, compared to Australia with 3-year terms, the UK has 5-year terms. So that's great if you've got a good government, but geez, it's a long time if you've got a rubbish government, which is currently the case here. But let's not underestimate how monumental this would be. The Conservative Party in the UK have been the most successful political party anywhere in the Western world over the last 200 years. They're currently now behind Reform in the polls. Farage has quite literally a once-in-a-century opportunity to change the structure and the dynamics of British politics. And so I think, again, we can't speak too soon. There's 4.5 years to go, and it's going to be a very long 4.5 years. But there is momentum behind reform. There is a seething anger in the population at the moment around the economy, around mass migration, around grooming gangs. They're taking that out on Labor. If they play their cards right, it is now very possible that Reform could win the election in their own right and avoiding a coalition with the Conservative Party.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to watch what happens the next couple of years. Look, what is clear, as we mentioned, that world leaders are scared of Trump. They at least respect him because he's a strong leader. We're already seeing deals being done now that he's back in power. Just look at what's happening in the Middle East. And Donald Trump recently slammed Colombia's president on Truth Social after he initially refused to accept US military planes carrying deported migrants. Now, Trump posted a photo of himself wearing a fedora next to a sign with 4 letters, FAFO. I actually had to figure out what this actually means recently, and I've discovered it's F around, find out. And after the threats about tariffs, Colombia's government agreed to allow US military flights carrying deported migrants to land. So FAFO at this stage, we're 1 week in, but it seems to be working for Trump.
Yeah, it does. Welcome to the age of FAFO diplomacy, and I'm all for it. It's worth actually just recounting this. You had 2 planes that were on course for Colombia full of illegal criminal migrants of Colombian heritage. The Colombian president says, no, too hard. We don't want them. Trump is on the golf course at the time and he goes, nah, sorry, mate. Gets out of his golf buggy, tweets away that we are going to put 25% tariffs on you. They're going to go up to 50% tariffs in a week. We're going to put sanctions on all of your senior leaders and oligarchs. We're going to stop any Colombian officials entering the country. We're going to basically make your life a misery. And within 20 minutes, not only did Colombia cave, they offered the presidential plane of Colombia to help get these migrants out of the US and into Colombian territory. It was extraordinary. And I was watching this in the pub at the time, just on Twitter going, this is so much fun. And what does it tell you? It tells you that, number one, that this is a very different Trump administration to the first time around. I would wager that that tweet that Trump sent was drafted long before the election. They are much more prepared. They're much more strategic. They're much more focused. And you've seen that with the executive orders that have gone out. And you've seen that with that response in that moment there. But the other thing is, it's just refreshing to see a leader that is unashamedly putting the interests of his country first. If it was Biden who was the president in the situation, he would have taken the plane back and then you would have had a review and some government department would have said, well, there might be this international law that we're potentially in contravention of. It would have gone for a few months and then nothing would have happened and it would have fallen out of the news and those people would have stayed in America. It is so good to finally see a country that is actually putting its people first. I just wish the UK and Australia would do the same thing.
Yeah, well, hopefully it does, because we are seeing the Trump effect right around the world. It'll be interesting. We'll be watching the election in Australia very closely. It's interesting watching Trump, the way he works. As you say, he's probably been drafting these tweets well before he actually came into power. And so we're seeing action being taken extraordinarily quickly. And what do the majority of Americans think of Trump? Well, he's essentially more popular than ever. A Reuters Ipsos poll this week found that more Americans approve of Trump's presidency now than when he took office in 2017. And his approval ratings are not only higher than in 2017, but they're also higher than throughout his entire first term. His approval rating is up 9 points from January 2017. What do you put this down to?
Yeah, I saw that poll as well. And then I went and did a bit of digging. And this is astonishing. He is the only president in American history to have a higher approval rating in the first month of his second term than the first month of his first term. Literally the only one in American history. And it raises a very interesting question as to whether Trump has changed or whether the American public have changed. Now, look, I think it is probably a bit of both. I think Trump is certainly more focused. I think he knows that he only really has 2 years to get what he wants to get done. I think there's a sense of urgency that just wasn't there when he was in there in government in the first time. But I think, to your point, the vibe shift is real. The American people have changed. Increasingly, the people of Australia and the UK and the Anglosphere are changing as well. I think the worst of wokeism is behind us. And I think increasingly, particularly when you have really difficult economic times, as we've seen in the US, as we're seeing in the UK, as we've seen in Australia, people prioritise outcomes over virtue signalling, and they're very happy that they've now got a leader that is doing the same thing.
100%. And after 4 years of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, no wonder people are so happy to have Donald Trump back. But finally, I want to get your thoughts on the controversial Doge, the Government Department of Efficiency, that it has provided an update. In the first 80 hours, approximately $420 million of current and impending contracts have been cancelled. 2 leases have been cancelled. And of course, the focus is mainly on DEI contracts. We're also seeing this under Donald Trump, that it appears DEI is basically dead. Yeah,
and good riddance to bad rubbish. I don't think you can underestimate how extraordinary the last week has been in American politics. One by one, all of the tenets of the woke orthodoxy that's been foisted on us by the elites for decades now have just been blown up by Trump with the strokes of a pen. DEI is one, but you've also had the climate alarmism, you've had open borders, you've had every single one of these particular illiberal progressive doctrines have just been pushed aside. Now, on the DEI stuff particularly, for Doge, this is low-hanging fruit. You can strip that out of every government department. Obviously, you know, the trains will still work, the army will still function. This is easy. It will be harder, though, when they start moving beyond this low-hanging fruit to find serious savings. The one thing which wasn't talked about really at all in the election campaign is debt and deficit, because both candidates said too hard. The US is now spending more on interest on their national debt than they spend on defence. That's extraordinary. And there is a pretty much an ironclad law that any great power that spends more on servicing their debt than on their military won't remain a great power for long. So Doge is a great start, but they're going to need to look at more serious spending cuts over the next 5 years, or else the US is going to be in serious problems. And I'm actually not sure at this stage whether Trump has the appetite for those spending cuts of that particular magnitude.
Okay, Will Kingston, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour. Great to speak with you.
Thanks, Gabriella.